So, are you really an introvert, or is there something else going on there? And could that be related to unhealed trauma, survival mechanisms, an overcompensation, or an adopted false sense of self, especially in social situations? Obviously, I'm making this video, so I think that for you, me, and a lot of other people, this plays a factor. Now, I'll start by saying, yeah, I do believe that introverts exist. I definitely am an introvert. I recharge when I'm alone, and if I don't get alone time, after a while, I start to lose my mind. But like many introverts, I have found myself able to have a wild amount of fun being a more extroverted person. And yet there are times also where I try to go into public and be social, and it's like, what's wrong with me? Did somebody drug me? Like, I feel like I just want to go to bed. Like, and so what's going on there? How can this same person feel completely different in two different social outings or in two different social situations? And yes, of course, it could be the surroundings for sure, and that's going to be part of the conversation. But really, what's going on inside of the person? What's going on inside of me? What's going on inside of you that could be creating a mental state that feels like introversion when it's actually you being exhausted of playing a character or a persona or working too hard while in social situations? And ultimately, how this is all rooted in anxiety and avoidance, fear-based thinking. It's not cognitive. It's not like, oh, if I go over and talk to that person, this, and this bad thing's going to happen. A lot of it's happening way below the level of the thoughts you interact with on a daily basis. It's really written into the code of your automated ways of being around people. But still, it's there, and it probably was written during the worst times of your life in situations you couldn't control, possibly at an age where your brain wasn't very well developed. You didn't have a strong sense of self yet because you hadn't even built yourself yet, so to speak. So are you really an introvert, or have you learned to overcompensate socially such that these events are way more work than they need to be for you, leaving you exhausted, spent, and those emotions tend to lead into the kinds of exchanges and events that reinforce this belief that we just can't do social situations. We just can't do people, places where it's happening. So really quick, I want to get into why this would occur, right? So let's say we have a child who goes into a social situation. They feel shamed or punished or left out, and their brain goes, I don't ever want to feel that way again. Right. And this isn't somebody who's traumatized. This is just anybody's brain trying to figure out how to make its way in the world, experiencing the least pain possible. And this is a very powerful thing because social rejection in the context of our survival brains is tantamount to death, right? Because our brains evolved in a time when we were running around the countryside in bands of 30, 40, 50, maybe clans up to 100, 120 people. Basically, imagine a group of 100 people who were, semi-nomadic. They lived completely off the land. There was no plan B. They either successfully worked together to stave off predators, cold, heat, famine, drought, right? They worked very, very hard. They had to be a very well-oiled unit to survive. And the way that our brains evolved allowed us to be very, very good social animals. This was how we evolved. This was how we survived those terrible times to get to the point where we could create more, quote unquote, civilization through technology, cities, urbanization, making all the fancy, fun things that we're enjoying at the moment. I'm talking into a camera that was made possible by the technological advancements. But at the core of all those advancements are the social fabric of how our brains work. Our brains don't like to be lone wolves. And people who tell you that they truly enjoy being a lone wolf, they don't need anybody. I mean, okay. Being a true lone wolf simply was not possible until very recently in human history. If you tried to be a lone wolf back 25,000 years ago, your survival rate would be measured in days, perhaps weeks, maybe months. Right? You would not survive any particularly difficult season alone. It just wouldn't happen. And if you don't believe me, ask yourself, why do we have insurance? Why do we all pay into a common fund and then pay out of that fund according to who needs it at this moment? Because that's massively more efficient. This is how we pool resources. I live in a city, right? They fix the streets. I pay toward that but I don't pay to fix my own street right in front of my house. I pay in to the community fund and we fix any street that needs to be fixed. It's massively more efficient and it allows us to get way more done with our dollars. The same is true of energy. The same is true of food, water, all the work we have to do to create a life. So is it possible to be a lone wolf? Yeah, but it's massively inefficient. And that inefficiency is going to bite you in the ass eventually, especially in a context of survival where it's just you and the elements. So our brains are very invested in this idea of making it work with other people, right? And generally speaking, the people who exhibit the highest levels of happiness are the people who are successfully doing that. They're successfully being with other people, whether it's successfully in relationships, social, parasocial, romantic, business, all these things are ultimately relationships. So let's say we have a 7-year-old, Billy, right? He has some bad experiences at school and maybe they're really bad. Maybe they're traumatic for him. Maybe they're so big that his brain cannot process them. Maybe there's some vicious bullying. Maybe there's some just like really harsh stuff going on that we would never want to put a 7-year-old through. Well, that little brain goes, this feels like I'm dying. I don't ever want to feel this way again. So how am I going to navigate social situations such that I never have to feel this way again? So now the next time Billy goes into a social situation, his brain is doing calculus to try to navigate, okay, where can I go and where can't I go? And if I go here, under what circumstances am I allowed to do that? He starts to learn that there are certain aspects of his personality that abusers picked up on. Right? The abusers found this aspect of his personality to be something that they could feed off of or something that they could mock or whatever. He learned that if he didn't bring out certain parts of his personality, that he wouldn't get noticed, right? So basically, Billy's personality becomes all about avoiding pain. And after a while, it has nothing to do with who's Billy, right? If you are doing life in order to avoid pain, you are not doing life in order to find out and express who you really are. You know, maybe this is a weird example, but for instance, if you want to create great art, are you going to do that in a place where there's lots of noise and people are bumping into you and threatening you? Or are you going to try to find a place that's quiet, serene, where you feel safe? We tend to make beautiful things out of safety. Why? Because if you're not safe to truly express yourself, then you're probably not going to make art. You're going to make something. Pressure doesn't create art. And some people say they thrive under pressure. Well, that just means that that person is good at solving problems using their creative skills. And that's great. That's a very useful tool. But if we're talking about making art that truly expresses them and something deeper about being human, I don't want them to create art that solves a problem because their problem is probably made up. It's probably an error in their perception to think that there's a problem to begin with. That means that they're trying to change something in their external circumstances via their art, which means they're in resistance to reality. Great art does not resist reality. It embraces it. Great art accepts. Great art reveals. It does not try to manipulate. And this is why great art can be shared by people from vastly different cultures. Why? Because it's about one person expressing their groundedness in reality, such that any other human being could possibly look at it and feel something. You know, there's that great scene in the movie Walk the Line where Johnny Cash goes in and he gets it's his one moment. It's his big moment in front of this radio guy to like cut a record. And he's in there singing gospel music and hymns and basically singing the kinds of music he thinks he needs to sing to be popular, to get onto the radio. And the radio guy just stops him and says, like, listen, man, like, just stop. And Johnny's like, well, I got more hymns I could sing for you. I could sing better hymns. I could try to do the hymns better. And the guy's like, basically saying, dude, what you're doing is not art, right? You're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to get something with your music. I'm looking for a musician who's going to bring art. That's the record I want to make. And so he asks him, if you were dead lying in a ditch and you had one song you could sing to God, what would that song be? And Johnny gets really uncomfortable, but then he kind of shifts back and forth and says, well, I think I have something like that. And Joaquin Phoenix in that movie does such a good job because he looks so uncomfortable as he starts to sing this song that's actually him, right? That's his art, a song that he made just out of pure expression, not trying to fix anything, not trying to solve anything or solve a problem. A song that just expressed the way he felt at a moment in time. And this ended up being a huge hit. John, I thought we were going to talk about being an introvert. What does all this have to do with, society and insurance and fixing potholes and Johnny Cash? Everything, right? Because ultimately, we're talking about, is it possible for you, an introvert, to go into social situations and not get exhausted by them? Yes. How is that going to happen? You're going to need to stop working. You're going to need to notice and see where you have built up this array of survival mechanisms and these beliefs about what you can and can't do, what you can and can't say, who you can walk up to, who you can't, what you're allowed to wear, how loud you're allowed to talk, if you're allowed to sing or what you're allowed to sing, or if you're allowed to dance or how you're allowed to dance. All these rules, you're going to need to examine them and hold them up to the light of day and say, is this really real? Is this who I truly am? Or is this somebody I learned to be to stay safe? Because if that's the case, if who you are socially is someone that's going to stay safe, well, no wonder you're fucking exhausted, because that is an enormous amount of work. Being a human is hard enough, right? Difficulties will come our way. But when you go through life trying to perform in a way that's going to please everyone around you and is going to prevent problems, well, you're trying to read everyone's mind. You're trying to predict everyone's behaviors, their thoughts, their feelings, their reactions. That is such a huge amount of calculus in your brain. You're using the supercomputer of your brain to try to prevent problems. There is very little room left for you being you. And guess what? That same supercomputer in your head, it can help you express something that's much more than just you trying to avoid pain. And when you allow that supercomputer in your brain to be free and to operate freely, you're going to create brilliant things. Whether it's the Mona Lisa, whether it's, a math equation that solves an age-old problem, whether it's showing up at work and being the person with that creative idea that's able to really help someone, or in this specific context, being able to show up at karaoke night, grab the mic, and just kill it. Not because you're the best singer, but because you're free. To have that one sparkling conversation, not because you're the best at conversation, but because you're free. To meet someone and be like, oh wow, this person's really cool, I want to hang out with them again. And knowing that if they hang out with you again, then they're going to get you because you were actually there. You actually showed up to that party or that work event or that whatever. It wasn't just you hiding in a corner or you trying to put on an act. That person met you or something close to it, and they saw something that they liked, because everybody else is searching for something unique the same way you are, right? So if you are going into social situations in an effortful way, you are actively getting in your own way. You are creating a huge amount of work for yourself, and no wonder you're exhausted. You're not able to enjoy social situations because you're not being social. You're trying to be a robot sent back from the future to somehow successfully navigate human relationships. That's just not what it is to be human. It's certainly not what it is to be free and to live well. So are you a true introvert, or do you exhibit introverted characteristics out of a learned survival mechanism? Are you an introvert? Maybe, yeah. Are you an introvert who can kill it at karaoke? Are you an introvert who can have sparkling conversations? Are you an introvert who could successfully walk right up to any person in the world and put out your hand and say, hello, how's it going? If you are an introvert, but you may be overly introverted by way of, I guess we could call this effortful introversion, right? So if you, like me, are an introvert, maybe a genuine introvert, you may have learned a whole other suite of introverted traits that are really about staying safe and have nothing to do with your real personality. You may also be a truly extroverted person, but social situations are so much work for you that you think that you're an introvert because they exhaust you and you need a break from them. You don't need a break from social situations. Maybe you just need a break from the massive effort it takes to hoist up and support this false self that you've built since childhood to keep you safe. Maybe, yeah, maybe you're an introvert. Maybe it's just impossible and exhausting to try to filter everything you do and say through the lens of perfectly predicting how everyone else is going to think, feel, and react, right? If you're able to let go of what other people think, how people are going to react, if you're able to let go of this lens of safety in social situations, then you open a door. It's not that you're magically a different person, but you open a door that you could step through and you could start to find out who you really are, right? And it's not something that you decide beforehand. You don't decide before the party, okay, here's who I am, these three things, because then you're projecting and predicting, and you're basically going to prevent your authentic expression, right? You'll know that you're letting go of this effortful, performative self when you can go into a situation with zero plan. Just going with the flow, being in the moment, not feeling a need for any particular outcome, just knowing that you are a part of the whole. No matter what social situation you're in, you belong there because you are a human being, and that's what human beings do, is they work together. And it's so much easier for others to work with you when they're working with the real you rather than the false you that you're putting on. And if you don't think that other people can pick up on the fact that you're exhibiting a false self, they can. They can. They might not always put it that way, right? But you're making it harder for other people to connect with you when you're in this effortful, performative, quote unquote, introversion. Ask me how I know. Yeah, let me be very clear. I'm the king of performative introversion mountain. Okay, I'm talking about this because this is something that I've noticed in my own life as a huge detriment. And I think that I will be much freer the more and more I'm able to let go of this. And I really believe that you will too. And anybody who who falls into this category, if you share this video with them, maybe it'll help them, feel like, yeah, this is a whole lot of work and life is short, and let's find out who we really are. That's the point here. That's ultimately what we're trying to do with these videos on this channel. And this is another great example of how healing isn't about doing better and being more. It's really about noticing the places where you're working way too hard and starting to stop doing that, letting it go. So if you found this video helpful, hit me with a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'd love to hear from you. Like, after listening to this, where are some places where you're showing up in a very effortful way just because that's how you've learned to stay safe? Are there situations where you could let go of some of that introverted suit of armor, so to speak, and where you could just experiment with effortless being and seeing what happens? I'd be really curious to know what aspects of life you're going to try to employ this in. And I'm also very curious to know how it goes. Also, if you have any questions about trauma, healing from trauma, you can ask those in the comments below. I'll make future videos on those topics. And I highly encourage you to go back and watch the previous 2 videos I've made in this channel. This is a new channel, so your support means the world. That's it for now. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.